Hello, everyone. I think we're going to get started. You have come to the karaoke session, so thank you. Just kidding. You are in the challenging economic assumptions in the creative economy. So if this was not your intended place, feel free to get up and leave, but we will all judge you. I'm Kate Fox. I work for the Center for Cultural Innovation, and I run our Ambitious initiative. And I have the delight of being the moderator for this conversation, and it really will be a conversation, and we hope you all get involved in the conversation as well. Thank you so much for being here. It is the food coma slot, so if people kind of have low energy, we may ask you to stand up and give it a little stretch. But otherwise, we're super excited to talk with you about our hot takes about economic assumptions that happen to those of us in the creative economy. And I don't know if you all had a moment, but you were like, what is that creative economy? I mean, I had to Google it. I'll just say it. And the good news is there's no single definition, so everybody is right and everybody's wrong. But I'm just going to share with you Americans for the Arts definition, just as a jumping off place. It is an economic ecosystem of for-profit and nonprofit creative industries, artists and artist workforce, educators, entrepreneurs, vendors, policymakers, and funders that produce and distribute creativity and artistic-based goods and services. That is just one definition, but when I was looking at that definition, I was like, oh, our panel, for-profit, nonprofit, lots of artists, arts workforce, education, entrepreneurship, and as is often the case, at least in my own personal experience, I live both inside the definition and outside the definition. The work that we do with Ambitious is really creative reimagining of economic ecosystems. And particularly those that center cultural communities under threat. And for us, that means in particular Black and Indigenous communities. So it's an imperfect definition, is all I'm saying. So as we were having conversations about this particular topic, there are so many different directions that we could take it. And so I thought maybe I would just start with a real short story about some economic assumptions that I found myself bumping into, and then invite my colleagues here to introduce themselves and then to share one or two of the economic assumptions that they would like to challenge. So before I started at the Center for Cultural Innovation, I spent 9 years at the MacArthur Foundation running their Culture, Equity, and the Arts program. And also, because that wasn't enough, I had an institutional grant-making portfolio as well that looked across the foundation. And what was really cool about that portfolio was that it was a surprise grant. And it was usually a lot of money that these organizations were not expecting. And so in its last year, we decided we'd do all the awards to the arts portfolio. One of the pleasures of running both programs. And I was like, great, who needs money like artists? Like, they need a lot of money to do their work. And so we proceeded to make a number of grants, really large grants, some small and mid-sized organizations that for some of them, it was the size of their budget. Like, that's how big those grants were. They weren't planning on it. They didn't have to apply for it. It was just a ring, ring, ring. Guess what? You have a lot of money coming to you. And I thought this was great. And the organizations were blown away. And, right, more money is good. Well, a few weeks later, I got a call from one of the grantees, and they were like, we're so grateful. And also, some of our board members are leaving our board. And I was like, what? This is supposed to shore up your financials and give you a sense of security so you can go out and take artistic risk. And they said, yeah, but when our board heard that we were getting this big windfall from a very well-known and established funder, they felt like our credibility within the communities that were serving and whose stories we're highlighting became suspect. And so I was like, okay. And you know, I hadn't unpacked my own assumptions, right? Like I was like, good, more money, good money, yes, arts, yay. And there were some real ramifications for providing that level of support to these organizations that were in that small and mid-sized range. And there's a whole thing, right? We've all heard about the starving artist, right? That's the purity of the form. And it's harmful. And, you know, I have since in my own career spent a lot of time stopping myself to say, okay, what economic assumptions am I unwittingly putting my foot into? And I think it's really important. And there are some, we have to do a lot more to unpack not only our own economic assumptions, but when people look at the arts sector, they're coming in with a lot of assumptions as well. And so this is really an invitation to question some of those. Okay, that's enough for me. So maybe I'll start with Jean-Nic. Yeah?
All right, I'm the first.
You want to introduce yourself and then share an economic assumption or two?
I think I can do that. Okay. So my name is Jean-Nic Bonton, and I am a recovering starving artist. And my method of recovery is becoming commercial and getting some money. But my trade is I'm a film composer. So I do music for film, TV, video games, basically make music for media, which is a very commercial venture. And when I was thinking about getting into this, I saw people who did this who made a lot of money. And one of my agents, who's not my agent now, he had said, if you become a film composer, it's hard because what you're asking is to be rich. So that was the model that I walked into, that, wow, if I become a film composer, I'm going to be rich, right? And there must be some kind of economic framework that I would have access to if I worked hard and I was in the right rooms at the right time and, you know, I was lucky. So all those things kind of happened. I guess I'm talented. I was in the right room at the right time, and I got lucky. Last summer, I scored or wrote the music for Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. And okay, thank you. Thank you. And I ended up being the first African American to score a summer blockbuster film. So thank you. Which is also a lot to be said in 2024, but okay, we'll leave that at the door. So I should have access, right? But that was my assumption, is that the frameworks that were set up and tried and true since the past 50 years, I would actually have access to. And those frameworks, you know, those revenue streams are under attack. And it's really funny that as soon as the doors have been opened to a larger variety and diversity of people, that these revenue streams are being disrupted. And of course, they're being disrupted by the same thing that's giving people opportunity. They're being disrupted by technology. Technology has allowed us to create more content, have more content available around the world. And that means we need to create more content to feed it. But of course, that just means that there's less money or less revenue per each piece of content. And the things that were set up, such as streaming rights or streaming revenue or mechanical royalties or record royalties, performance rights royalties, they're all been diluted because of the technology, right? Case in point, back in the day when everybody watched Friends, right? You guys watched Friends back in the day, right? It was like, what was it, 8 o'clock on a Thursday, whatever it was, right? 8 o'clock on a Thursday, they knew that everybody in the United States was going to be watching Friends. Did they really know that? They didn't really know that. They had this thing called a Nielsen survey, where they would take a small sample of the population that was usually skewed, but we won't talk about that either. And they would say, based on this small sample, we know that a bajillion people are watching Friends. And ad revenue was based on that assumption, right? And as a composer, if they use that ad revenue and they use all that stuff to say, okay, this is how much money you're going to get in your performing rights royalties. Well, enter in streaming. There's no more assumptions. The technology has disrupted that. They know exactly when you hit play on that program. They know you stayed for only 2 seconds before you left, right? And they know so much more information. And of course, they're saying, well, we're not going to pay you for 2 seconds. We know exactly how many people watch this show, and we want to pay you accordingly. Therefore, the performing rights royalties for streaming are cents on the dollar to what you had from broadcast networks. So AI is coming in. There are just so many things from technology that are disrupting this revenue stream. So the assumption that these things are going to be here for you to make a living, they're no longer there. And hopefully we'll be talking about other ways and other things that we should be thinking about as we move forward into this new paradigm.
Yeah, thank you. I will be thinking about that too. I'm Emily Roller. I'm a writer. I write fiction. I write for the stage. I'm also an entrepreneur and an educator. I was co-founder of Midnight Oil Collective. And then also co-founding an edtech platform for artists to learn entrepreneurial skills called Maker States. And honestly, Kalita stole most of my talking points this morning. And I'm not sure that I can say it better, but I do think that some of them bear repeating a little bit. And I think, directly talk to what you're speaking toward as well. And for me, the two major economic assumptions that I was thinking about, kicking off my little portion, were that as an artist, all you need to do is be really good at your craft. And that there will be some sort of an avenue for you, that somebody will discover you in some mysterious process, or that you'll submit for a couple of things and then you'll get plucked out of obscurity and then you'll get to do the one thing that you love doing most in the world. And for your career, and it'll be lovely. And that sounds lovely. And it would, and in a way it would be lovely, but that's not the reality that we're seeing. It never has been, actually, to a certain degree. Even getting yourself into the room that you got yourself into, I'm sure was actually more of a process than what you initially say, right? And so it's not even like you don't just wander into those rooms anyway, right? You work and you position yourself and you talk to people and you put yourself out there and you get your work out there. But they don't talk about that in school. They don't talk about that in training programs. And so there's an assumption, I think sometimes, that like my whole job is to get good at my craft. And to solely focus on that. And that's where the artistic integrity comes from. And it's just not true, right? And you'll be very stuck if you're waiting to be discovered. You'll be very stuck if you're just relying on blind submissions, in open casting calls, those sorts of things. You're not going to get very far just relying on those means. So that's one of them. The second assumption I want to kind of put out there and challenge a little bit is that the only thing missing for most artists to be successful is funding. And I want to put that out there because as somebody who started a company that was largely focused and sort of based on this assumption that artists need funding in order to get their project going, and that is necessary, and it is. So I'm not saying that it's not necessary. But I'm saying it's not the only thing that's necessary. And it's not the only thing missing right now. And when we have this discussion about funding, we also need to have this discussion about equipping artists with the skills that they need to use that funding to create sustainability for themselves, right? And to do it in the long term. We all know that you can give an artist funding and they can make something cool. And that is usually true. If it's a good artist and you see them and you give them funding, they will make something cool. But we don't know that cool thing will find its way to an audience. We don't know that cool thing has a model behind it that's going to, make all of the work put into making the cool thing make it actually give a financial return or even make an impact, right? Because if it's not finding its audience, it's not really making an impact either. There's a saying my colleague has shared with me from a book called Disciplined Entrepreneurship, that innovation is invention times commercialization. And that the times is that the multiplying factor is important, right? Because if you have zero commercialization, it's zero, right? If nobody gets to see your invention, if it doesn't get into the hands that it's supposed to be in, there is no impact, right? And so I think like learning that it's not just a funding problem, right? And that if you're finding yourself in this position where the thing you're saying to yourself is if only I had funding, I would be able to do X. I would invite everybody to do what I had to do as well, because I have had that exact mentality, and challenge it just a little bit and think about like, what else should I be doing? Who are the partnerships that I need? What sort of traction can I be building right now? How well defined is my business plan? How well do I know my audience? Have I talked to my audience? Have I shown them the thing that is supposedly for them in any form that I possibly can? And I think asking yourselves all those questions and taking the time to really engage in a disciplined entrepreneurship is really an important thing.
Hello, is this on? Greetings and good day. I'm learning so much constantly, and my name is David Blasher. Most folks call me Blasher around here. I use he, him pronouns. I'm based in New York City. I have a background as a cellist, an actor, a filmmaker, an attorney, and right now I'm the executive director at an organization called the MAP Fund. The MAP Fund has been around for about 35 years. We're a nonprofit funded in generous support from private foundations, Doris Duke, Mellon, Walder, Howard Gilman, along with public support from the NEA and arts agencies in New York. The MAP Fund has two primary programs. We provide project grants and coaching for performing artists. We have an open call national grant-making program. That's been the core program for the last 35 years, and there are many artists who have gotten funding through many different stages of their careers. And something that was born out of the grant making, which I think touches on some of what y'all have been saying, is another program called SPA, which stands for Scaffolding for Practicing Artists. It's a coaching program that was born out of the grant making. The artists who were receiving grants from the MAP Fund went to the MAP to say, this is great, this money is super helpful. And I should say, currently we're finishing up a grant cycle that will result in 93 project grants in the amount of $30,000 each, plus a $1,000 micro grant. So each grantee can give $1,000 unrestricted to anyone in their community. We're learning interesting things from that as well. About a quarter of the micro grantees have never applied for funding at all, ever. So we're exploring with that. There's a lot of equity and justice that goes into the grant-making process that our team takes very seriously and thoughtfully. About 93% of our last grantee pool comprised BIPOC folks, Indigenous, queer, trans, femme. We look to support a lot of innovative, challenging, radical performing arts that are trying things and experimenting. We like to reward that risk. Back to artists coming to say, I've got this fund, it's great, and I have a lot of questions about how to delegate. This puts me in a different tax status. How do I use this money? How do I organize? And so SPA, Scaffolding for Practicing Artists, was born from David Scheingold and Maura Brennan, friends and our former executive director at MAP, to create this coaching program with the idea of accompaniment. And it involves currently one-on-one coaching over the course of a year, one-on-one between the artist grantee and a coach. Our coaches are artists and art workers themselves. Some have gone through SPA previously. Many have their own coaching programs where they're specifically working on business approaches and expertise. And something really beautiful happens in that one-on-one, creating trust, slowing down, creating relationships, being able to ask questions you didn't know you could ask. And the coaching process over the year culminates in 2-day gatherings where the artists come together in small groups of 5 or 6 to bring their questions, to have a center stage. And many of the questions and the ideas that come forth are gorgeous substantively. The ideas that they're working with, the demographics, the history, the climate change, the humanitarian, all the different, like the meat of their work. And then I often see them say, can I ask a boring question? How do you do money? How do you delegate? How do you collaborate? I haven't done this before. I'm sorry, this is a boring question. And that's when everybody perks up, because these are, I often see in the room, people don't know if it's a place to ask those questions, to not know. And I have a friend who reminds me, don't worry alone. Find your groups, find your people. Some of them may be paid members of your team. Some may be friends who have expertise. Don't worry alone. Find soft places to land so you can ask those questions. So it's a beautiful thing to see. Artists being able to socialize the coaching. And it's a fabric that I'd love to continue to see how we can bring in new ideas about new skills and engagement with the market. MAP is really an arm of philanthropy. So we're part of an old tradition, essentially of, well, it's sort of like the court musician, isn't it? You know, like find your patron and they fund your career. So we are part of that system and are really interrogating what it means to be part of that and how to challenge it, how to grow it, how to modify it. Assumptions. I feel like I'm already rambling too much in my intro. An assumption that I was thinking about is that market success equals artistic success. And I was having a conversation with an artist last week who's received a MacArthur Genius Award, has had an amazing long career performing and creating productions around the world. And was telling me, you know, I'm struggling financially. So these ideas are gorgeous, they're brilliant. If I told you who the person was and you look them up, you'd see they're a leader in their discipline. And this person has a business person that they have worked with throughout their career to help them with the business. So I'm really curious about this idea of, if you're not necessarily got the business mind, how do you help get that? How do you get that help? How do you know how to ask for that? And that's something that I see come out of the SPA gatherings, is developing the practice of learning how to ask for help, learning how to specifically ask and invite people in. So this false binary of you either make money or you have artistic integrity.
Mm-hmm.
This assumption that making money is not a value. And also the reality that I see, particularly as you recognize the power in the room, what it takes to go to people with power, people with influence, people with money. It's not easy. It can be really difficult and really intimidating. And I'm saying this is something with like a law degree. I went to Yale as an undergraduate doing theater. It can be very intimidating trying to figure out how to get the right ask. Particularly when your art, I see these dancers that do things with their body, and I think, I'm so glad you've been practicing that. And yes, it's not enough, but like, thank God that somebody can move their body in a way that makes me cry. Thank goodness. I don't want them all to become a spreadsheet. So how do we help that? So, you know what I mean? We don't all want to become a spreadsheet, but like I like spreadsheets, but you know, so find me. So I'm also here at this conference. This is very new for me. I've been in this job for less than a year, and I'm interested to see the different ways that people are generating resources, support, not just financial. We know that like if you want to make your artistic project, you do need money, but that other holistic support, training, skills. I'm very curious to learn about the different models that people are experimenting with for helping an artistic practice to live, not just the career.
Thank you, all of you. I know, take a deep breath. One of the things that I thought was really beautiful about all of your expressions was both the passion that you brought to it, but also this idea that we do all make assumptions. We make assumptions all the time, and there are times when maybe it's better for us to ask questions than make those assumptions and to say, what is it that I really need? Help, please, or support, or not that much support in a different way. And I think one of the things about, I'm also in philanthropy, right? One of the things about philanthropy is it's, you know, everything looks like a grant. But the reality is people don't just need grants. People need a lot of different kinds of support. And sometimes it's capacity building, but sometimes it's a forgivable loan. Sometimes it's a recoverable grant. Sometimes it's a different structure. And we have not, philanthropy has not always exercised themselves in service of the people that we're supposed to be supporting. So I said there'd be some hot takes. That's a hot take. Okay, so we talked about the assumptions we want to challenge. What are some of the assumptions we wish people would make about the creative economy?
I can hop in a little bit. Yep. Okay. So I think one of the assumptions I wish people would make, or maybe a connection that that could be drawn a little bit more, is that there are models for successful development of IP out there, and a lot of them are in other fields, right? And so one of the models that I get really excited about talking about is like sort of the landscape for developing tech, right? And how is it that there is, there's this infrastructure built up to support technology, and to think like, actually, maybe there's not a huge difference between the intellectual property that artists are developing and the intellectual property that goes into some sort of a tech invention, right? Mm-hmm. And that we can find ways of thinking ourselves not as a person who sells something or who creates something to just sell immediately and creates something to sell immediately, and actually somebody who's like, oh, I can actually be the driving force behind this. I can be the founder that takes this all the way through with help, right? Definitely not alone, but understanding that maybe there are different ways to build out these teams. There are different tools that we can use that we don't think of that maybe go beyond the artist and manager relationship or the artist agent relationship, or the ones that, we've seen a lot of, the artist producer relationship. Maybe there are ways that we can look at other models for being like, oh, maybe we're just co-founders. Maybe there's a way of thinking about building out a company and sharing equity that we haven't tried yet in our field, but that we know can be successful because we see it successful all the time. So I would like to, just make the assumption that there's no thing that makes the arts radically different from other forms of IP development.
One assumption I would like artists to make is that they don't need the gatekeepers. Did anybody see Origin? Did anybody saw Origin, Ava DuVernay's latest movie? Amazing movie, right? I mean, I cried 5 times watching that movie, literally. She did not get funding from a studio for that movie. Every gatekeeper she went to for that movie turned her down, said no. It's not commercial enough. It's too controversial. No one's going to come see this, right? But yet she did not stop and say that the gatekeepers are going to keep her from making this movie. She went and found private funding and got her own distribution and built her own studio, right? Because she did not assume that the only way to get it done was through the gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. So now, was that way harder because she also had to write and direct a movie on top of all of that? It way was, right? Now she had to be a funder, right? But still, she was so passionate about getting the story out that she did that. And that's a huge inspiration to me personally, that as an artist, I don't have to listen to these gatekeepers. I can find ways to get my art out there and to connect with people, which is the most important thing for art anyway, is to connect with people, is to give people a sense of purpose, inspiration, healing, presence, education. And nobody is going to stop me from getting that out there, thanks to Ava's example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I'll add to that the assumption that I'd like for us to know about is that artists are organizing, are activists, and are not siloed just as artists. I don't mean to belittle the term artist, and we've talked about this a bit on our panel, that like we can sometimes lionize like the artist. I was talking with an artist down in New Orleans who is working on climate change, education, food in the community through performance, bringing kids in, a floating barge. There's this whole project that they're building with community. It's a collective. They're experimenting with a lot of different topics that are happening in their environment. And these are artists who are building it in collaboration with people in other industries. So the sense that like, I mean, it's always funny to have art and culture as a separate thing, as if culture is distinct from all the other things that we're working on. And I know philanthropy plays a role in that. Like, you can apply for this arts funding, but not, or you can, the zero-sum game that it can be climate change work or art.
Right.
It can be technology or art. It can, you know, and we know that it's
And you have to
integrated.
make a choice.
You have to decide, who are you?
You have to declare yourself. I am this or I am that. It's such a harmful and yet such a common practice. And this idea, you know, that a lot of the arts organizations, I won't even say arts organizations, a lot of the artists and creatives and culture bearers that we fund don't look like traditional philanthropy would fund as arts. It's not a mural. I love murals. They're beautiful. Like no shade on the murals, but these folks are actually world builders. What if artists, creatives, and culture bearers really embraced that idea of world building? It's one of the reasons that a lot of times when they come to pitch for a big foundation or for one of our nonprofit intermediary structures, you know, it's like, okay, do I need to emphasize the racial justice element or the culture creation, or do I go hard on the economic systems change? And we're asking people to make choices about that. And I feel like that's a real problem. And Emily, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot a little bit, I mean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Midnight Oil Collective and the way that you all are approaching that as artists, entrepreneurs, economic systems builders. Like, it is all of those things. And what does it mean to embrace all of those identities?
Yeah, I mean, the Midnight Oil Collective has a really interesting history because it really is also a history of iteration and experimentation, and trying a lot of things, putting our values and theories into practice, right? And to varying degrees of success, to a certain extent, right? Not everything is perfect, and not every investment that we've made is going to pay off. But you know, I think it is a really important thing to not just theorize, right? And to find ways to test those theories out and to learn from them and to grow from them. So Midnight Oil Collective did start as a collective of artists working together, sort of being like, the one thing we're missing is funding. And so which is the exact economic assumption that I said I came in here to challenge, right? And it's born from experience, right? And so we came in there thinking that. And we raised funding. We were able to raise a lot of funding. And it wasn't the only thing that we needed, as it turned out, right? We actually needed to grow in our understanding of business models. We actually needed to learn to build the skills to adapt to a changing environment. We had a strike in the middle of all this for the film and TV industry. We have economic disruptions all the time right now, still in the middle of a period of inflation, a period of instability across the economy. Capital's not super easy to access right now necessarily, right? And so there were a lot of things that we had to learn as a group along the way. There were so many points that Khalida made today in her keynote speech. I hope a lot of you got to hear that, that really resonated, because sometimes it's also about, you don't always end up with the people that you start with, right? And sometimes you have to make choices and people find their own ways to go separate ways. And you have to, really understand that those can be very painful situations, but sometimes those are very necessary situations, right? And you can't do other people's work for them, and you can't do things out of whatever the assumptions you're taking. So I think the story of Midnight Oil Collective is really a story of learning all of those things through action, and then finding the things that did work, and finding the people and figuring out how to form those relationships in positive ways, figuring out the needs in a really deep way of artists. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but
Emily, can you say a little bit more too about what's the process for artists newly join the collective newly? Like, how often do new artists join the collective, and what's the relationship commitment that they're making?
Sure. So, absolutely. Suppose we're at it's an interesting time period for you to ask us about that, right? So we have taken artists in 3 cohorts so far. And the idea is we would take an artist in through a cohort and take them through sort of an incubator program where we did try to teach a lot of the skills that we felt would be necessary in order to handle an investment, right? Because we're actually an investment model. And so it's not a grant, and there are strings attached. It is a real relationship that you're forming that's a little different from the ones that artists are used to. And so we knew we needed to spend a little bit of time explaining that and making sure that it was the right fit for the right project, right? Because it's not for every project. You do have to want to make a return. It does have to be a certain type of return. It doesn't work for everything. So we took artists on through, we've done 3 different rounds of it, all with, I could go on and on about like the things we've learned because we did things differently each of the 3 times, again, to varying degrees of success. The most successful one was the longest one where the most people dropped out. And I call that successful because the ones who were left really did have a very strong understanding of what they were coming into. Really, really put in a lot of work to stick around. And I also call it a success because some of the ones that dropped out are still thriving, but under different models. And if they would have taken on funding with us, it would actually have been a problem for us and for them. And so it was a matter of finding a much better fit for funding or for revenue sources going forward. And so that was the most successful. That was the second one through. The third time we messed it all up again. And so it's one of those things where we're like, oh, we could do it a lot faster. You can't do it faster. And so, we'll chop this in half and try to condense it. And it didn't work, or it didn't work as well. And so it's just a continual learning process. Right now we're pausing. We're not going to take on another cohort until we actually fully commercialize something through. And so we're trying to just make sure that the rest of the, sort of pathway can get built out. Yeah. So, yeah, sure.
Janique, can you, this is going to sound like a very random question, but I promise there's a reason. How is your organization set up in terms of legal structure?
You mean my composing business?
Yes, your composing business.
My composing business, yes. So thank you. So it's one of the things I had to learn because of the business side of being a composer, because you are working with corporations and studios, and they want to see a certain structure as well, because they're not just going to hire, a minstrel off the street for various reasons, even though they could be a very talented minstrel. So I'm set up as an S Corp, which basically is a small corporation, which basically means I have all the protections of a corporation, but at the end of the year, the corporation can't hold any profits, can't hold any sort of assets. So it all has to flow through to me on what they call like a K-1, right? So the profits come to me. But it's a great place for me to not only sort of structure the business, hire employees, and I've hired several employees, hire contractors, through the business as well. Because, when you're working on a film, especially the large ones, you have a large group of people that you need to recruit and manage, and, well, they want to get paid, right? And pay them. So the S Corp handles all of that. The S Corp handles the health insurance for my employees. I'm one of the few people that actually give health insurance to my employees in LA in the composing community. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. but it's very important to me. So it gives me a lot. And it also, most importantly, though, gives me protection. So that if anything goes wrong, when we do a film score, I have to sign something called Certificate of Authenticity, Certificate of Authenticity, or the C of A as we call it, which basically means that everything that I'm giving to the studio is authentic and is written by me, and I can rightfully pass the copyright over to them. Now, heavens forbid that we get sued or anything like that, because I might have just heard, Beethoven's Fifth one day, and it ended up in one of my scores. Well, that's public domain, so that's fine. Yeah. So I could have done that one. But I heard Hans Zimmer's Inception one day, and it went into my score by mistake, right? And Hans Zimmer decided to sue me. Well, they would be suing me personally. They would be suing my S corp. Yeah. And that means they couldn't take my house. They could take my kids if they wanted to, but they couldn't take the house at least. So that provides some sort of level of protection. And then what happens is the S corp does what's called a loan out, where they loan me out to the studio, right, to do the actual work, right? So it's called a loan out. And did I know all this stuff starting? No. Did I learn all this stuff at Yale? No, right? It's stuff that I picked up over time, working with my agents, working with managers, working with studios. I remember my first studio gig. They wouldn't hire me unless I had an S corp. So they're like, no, we're not going to hire you. So you need to get an S corp done right away. And luckily, I was able to work with my accountants to get it done quickly. But they really want to see these structures in place because they want to have a business to business. Now, on the rare occasion that they do hire you without that S corp or an LLC structure, the studio is required to hold back 40% of what they pay you for taxes. Really? That's right. Yes, that's right. So it really does behoove you to do that, right? To set up your corporation that way. In the state of California, you do have to pay $800 every year to the state of California just to exist. So hopefully you make more than $800 that year.
Thank you for that.
I know, so boring.
No, it was so good because I didn't hear nonprofit once. It is possible to make your art outside of a nonprofit. So I'm just saying. Okay, now is the time for you all to enter the conversation. Any economic assumptions you want to challenge? Anything you want to put out there? Response to anything you've heard here? All is fair game. And maybe I'll walk around with a microphone, or anybody have, okay, good, Claire, okay. This is how I get my steps in. Okay. Yeah.
My name is Clara Narty. I'm an artist, a visual artist. I create art using fabrics and threads to make portraits. I actually have artwork on the hallway down here. The assumption I want to challenge is that artists are not good at business.
Yes.
I think a lot of us hear that and we close our minds and we say we can't do it. And I think that is one of the main reasons that we can't do it, because we close our minds and we think that we can't do it. I also think that we don't get the resources. We are not trained in any way to see see business as part of an art practice. We are made to think of them as two separate things, but it cannot be separate. You cannot just fill your studio with artwork and not put it to the market. So it has to be together. So I want to challenge that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Go ahead. Okay.
Hi, my name is Dawn Leaks. I'm Dawn Leaks Ragsdale. I'm the executive director of the Center for Inclusive Growth here in New Haven. And I just have a question for David, because you mentioned a well-known prominent artist that had a long career that was struggling financially, but you also mentioned that this person had like a business person in their life that was helping them. Can you talk a little bit more about like why they were struggling, or if you were able to get that or glean that, and what you think some of the solutions for that might be?
Yeah, absolutely. Dawn, did you
Yes.
say? Yeah, this artist said to me, I'm not great at business. I don't know. This person creates amazing artwork, the transportive artwork. And yes, they've had a long-term relationship with a business person, a person who is really, I mean, they're in a very close relationship in terms of this other person creating all of the grant making and handling taxes, handling finance, setting up deals, working with the agents. And so I don't know a ton about their relationship, but what this particular artist said about hitting financial difficulties is in the last couple of years, particularly with a pandemic that is not over, influx of money to help certain, to help artists, to help art organizations, to help quote unquote DEI efforts, and then that money dissolving very quickly after. They also were talking about this place that they're in where the ideas that they want to develop, because for a lot of artists, the material that they're extracting from is themselves, their bodies, their voices, their memories, their ideas. And being able to be in a position that they've said that they've been privileged to be able to say no to some opportunities because they're not, that there wasn't enough resource behind them to make them what they actually want them to be. So I honestly can't speak too much about their relationship with this person, but it has been very important to them for the last like 40 years to have this person with them, accompanying them. They also shared that they recently did a project with a friend. It was the first time in a long time that they did a project where they didn't care if it made money. Their soul needed them to be in collaboration with somebody to like create again without having to worry about making money. So I know that goes a little bit against what we're talking about up here. You can't just make the art, but sometimes you have to make the art for your soul as well, so you don't give up hope. I know I'm not able to address all of the questions that you have, but I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more after as well.
Ooh, look at all those hands. Okay, I'm gonna go to the back and I'm gonna bring you. Okay, we're gonna go first.
Hi, my name is Chris Appleton, the CEO at Art Pharmacy. I have a question around the idea of total addressable market. I think we talk about creative industries as being this huge market opportunity, it's this huge driver in the economy, but really we're talking about advertising and marketing, film and media, commercial music. But then when we talk about artists and cultural workers and what opportunity is there for them, it's a much smaller addressable market, right? Like oftentimes we're not seeking that, we're not seeking the full scope of that market opportunity. And so how do you reconcile that from an economic opportunity standpoint?
That would be you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one thing is when people talk about art, there's probably everybody in here has a different thing that's popping into their head about what we mean, whether we're talking about visual arts, are we talking about theater, are we talking about film? And so the first thing that I would say to answer that question is a lot of artists are going to start businesses and are going to pursue a professional career in something that is more like a small business, or that is something a lot more like a small, medium enterprise, where they're not necessarily going for that huge total addressable market, right? But where there still is a way to have a sustainable business model and play a really important part of local communities. It's not going after that really big piece of the market. So then when you're talking about the type of intellectual property that artists are creating that does have sort of that larger potential, it's an interesting conversation, right? Because in order to unlock it, there has to be a lot of creativity in terms of how is this going to get distributed and how is it going to reach people. But of course, you see examples of it all the time, right? I mean, you see prominent examples, in Taylor Swift. You see and not just in like, oh, she's making music that, lots and lots of people enjoy, and then she's got the tour, and then she goes direct to the movie theaters and does a direct deal with the distributor, which had never been done before, right? And has that pathway that cuts out an intermediary and builds in more profits for her. She buys back her rights to her original, or she doesn't buy it back. She tries, and they don't do it. So she re-records her music so that she owns it, right? And so this is somebody who's really thinking in terms of these larger, total addressable markets. And there are a lot of examples. You look at like Wicked the musical, or Hamilton, and Wicked's getting ready to come out as a film, and then down the line it's going to be released to high schools, and then everybody's going to hear Wicked for a long, long time, all the time, right? But these are billion-dollar artistic franchises based off of one sort of initial copyright that then gets turned into lots of derivative properties. And so in those cases, that total addressable market is very large.
But I guess this also begs to ask the question, because it seems like the way that a sort of an artist kind of makes it is you start out small, playing small gigs, get a small community, sell mixtapes out of the back of your car, right? And then one day someone discovers you and they start to propagate you to a much larger audience, right? Does that always have to be the case? Is there a way for people to make a decent living sort of really investing in their local communities, really investing in that specific domain? And then there's a larger entity that could be looking at these opportunities and aggregating and looking to see where there are actually synergies for different artists to go into different local communities, right? And people being able to build a life that way. Because, I think these models of being an artist and building, insane amounts of wealth, like the Taylor Swifts or the Beyoncés or One Day Me, right? Get in the way of the joy of just making art. Mm-hmm. Get in the way of expressing yourself to a group of people and connecting with them. And that's the real joy, right? When I write something or do something, right? But one of the pieces that I have the most love that I made was during the summer 2020. I was so moved by the country coming out against the injustice for George Floyd that I wrote a piece called Breathe. And it was around the fact that every human's right should be the right to breathe. And so many people are denied that right. And the movements are life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness. Also things that have been denied to so many people. I loved making that piece of art. That piece of art gave me purpose, and it allowed me to be connected to a larger worldwide movement. But it's only been performed 3 times, right? In very sort of local spaces. But the people in those spaces have been moved. They've thought about themselves in the grand picture of this world, right? And hopefully inspired, at least maybe for the 5 minutes it was playing, to think differently about themselves and to find out ways that we can be more humane with each other, right? And that's true meaning. And I think when we want to be mega successes, we lose the fact that the joy that's created from those small venues, those smaller expressions of our art. And that gives me joy to come and interact with people with love, integrity, and honesty. So if there's a way that we can start to aggregate and find synergies from these smaller communities, these smaller acts, I think that's an amazing thing that can be done. I don't know if anybody's doing that.
I mean, I think, and it sounds like you're doing it.
Well, no.
And actually, I think that's important though, right? And I think a lot of artists have different practices that are going on. Sometimes you're doing it just for your own mental health, right? Sometimes you're doing it to try to make this one the piece that you're really investing in, to try to make money. Sometimes you're doing it for these different purposes. All of them can use different models, but I think it's important for artists to understand these options and for us to really talk about the different ways that those different paths can become sustainable, or the different ways you can put together a career to make them sustainable. And I think it's all about still saying that you're not bad at business. It's about saying, like, I can learn this, I can explore these different paths, I can take, ownership and agency in my career and find the model that works for what I'm trying to do.
But let's debunk that a little bit. Sorry, I don't mean to. About the bad at business, because some people are bad at business, right? I got a grant, I bought a Mercedes. That's bad at business, right?
That's having the right priorities. No.
But
Maybe that's very good.
some people just get taken advantage of, right? I mean, we hear about all these people who get into record deals and the record label owns everything and then they get an advance. And guess what? When you get an advance, you have to recoup that money before you see another dime. And if you don't, well, then you're stuck on the hook for another thing. And people not owning their masters or their IP. So there has been a history of artists being taken advantage of.
Yes. Yeah, there has been.
And hopefully through education, right, we can tell artists to be more savvy. By talking about how artists were taken advantage of, people go, oh, wait, that sounds familiar, right? And being vulnerable in that way. I think we need to share our horror stories, not because it makes us look bad, but because it will keep someone else from making the same mistakes.
Yeah. And I still don't want people to really challenge this idea of being bad at business. We don't usually let people say like, oh, I'm just bad at reading, or some other basic skill. You know what I mean? And so like, we need to actually treat this as a more foundational, more like fundamental skill that we need to, I think, like push people towards so they don't get taken advantage of, right? And we can't take this like, oh, I didn't read my contract, I got taken advantage of mentality either. Like there is some personal responsibility on that. And that's not just, and there are predatory, and this is not, there are very, very predatory practices out there, right? And this is actually part of the reason artists need to get good at business so that they can design the systems that are more equitable, where the wealth isn't pooling in just one or two artists, right? Where there is more of it going back to the organizations that help support them along the way, where nonprofits can find other avenues of revenue by maybe being attached to some of these larger works, right, that then can pay that back so that they can support a broader range, right? We have to think much more creatively and expansively about the whole ecosystem and all of the different pieces in it. But I think that starts with understanding the basic pieces.
And we can redefine what it means to be good at business. It doesn't necessarily have to mean the traditional models and quote unquote mainstream. Artists who are entrepreneurs and caring for the practice that accomplishes amazing things are already entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. How to translate some of those skills or bring from your community the values, the beliefs, the language from your own community of which you're already an expert, and practice them in other places so that they can be shared. I'm getting a 5-minute warning from the back, but what do you want to check?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
I'm the last. Oh my God. I'm the last question. Y'all have 3 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. So my economic assumption, first of all, this is fabulous. Thank you so much for speaking to your experience and to what you're seeing. And I love that there's discourse and that there's actually dissonance in what y'all are saying. Because I think that all of this is very real in all of the ways that art is made, right, in this world. My economic assumption as someone who fundraises all day, every day, is that the capital in the art sector specifically is very inflexible. You've got philanthropic dollars and you've got for-profit dollars, and nary the twain shall meet, right? Like they don't talk to each other, but there's a lot of money in both sectors and you almost have to know completely different languages in order to talk to those folks. What are solutions to make those two sectors talk to each other and so that you can create more flexible models of production? Government, fix it.
We can have creative gatherings to bring members of those organizations together and swap roles. Actually, I think that would be a fun exercise to have somebody from one sector pretend that they're from the other, walk in somebody else's shoes. I don't know the answer to that, but I would love to explore it with people.
Yeah, I mean, it's, to a certain extent, we kind of walk on both sides as investors and also as philanthropic capital. And so this idea of integrated capital and getting more institutional funders comfortable with this idea of like, oh, we can do more than a grant, or oh, we can do a grant plus an impact investment. Yeah, I mean, that is a huge question, and one that we should all spend some time thinking about. Like, how do we cross-pollinate? I mean, right, one of the things that's kind of a crazy that we're all here is that there are all these science and tech and, you know, folks that we never get invited to those tables, man. Wouldn't it be great if we could sit with people who are in pharma tech or health tech and be like, hey, art pharmacy, like we can do things. Yeah, we can do things that are augmenting the kind of work that they're already comfortable with, but they just don't know because we have to build the world that we want and then help people see the value in that. So, oh my gosh. Okay, so this is our closing minute.
Oh, wow.
I know. Think about it. So afterwards, maybe we'll go out back so the next panel can get set up in here. But we're happy to chat, and I'm so sorry we didn't get to everybody's awesome points. So, okay, so our last exercise, I think, was complete the statement. Invest in the creative economy because... Blasher, you're up first.
Invest in the creative economy because our humanity depends on it. A Chorus Line, the Broadway show that came out in 1975, was born from interviews of out-of-work dancers, amazing talented dancers who told the stories of why they dance, and it involves sexuality and gender and childhood trauma and dreams. And many will argue that the success of A Chorus Line revitalized Broadway, revitalized Times Square, from people telling personal stories about their dreams, and it resonated with people. And then it ended up having this amazing effect economically. An outlier, perhaps, but our humanity depends upon it.
Okay, Emily?
We got this question in advance, and I was actually going to say the exact same thing. Are you ready? It's on it. No, the exact same thing. I think that it's how we understand ourselves. The narratives that are out there, they're integral to everything. And so I do think that our humanity depends on it. And since you brought up Chorus Line, it wasn't just people telling their stories, it was also economically structured so that everybody participated, and the organization that funded it was participated, and it was something that really kept the public going for a long time and able to fund new works, right? So it has the artistics, it has both sides to it, and that's part of why it's successful. But it is a fabulous example of all of those pieces working together in a really brilliant way. But our humanity does depend on it. Agreed. Seconded.
Okay, so I got to finish this. Boy. Invest in the creative economy because you are investing in people. And we'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, everyone.